Chapter 9. I'm filming this one while I'm waiting for the parent camp meeting tonight. The next morning, I told Josie, Michael, and Tom about the unexpected adventure my mum had taken me on, and they all said they wanted to come with me next time and meet the man in the red turban with the king's heart too. None of them had ever seen the inside of a pomegranate before, so I tried to describe the colour and shapes and the seeds to them while I was on the school bus. But they still looked really confused, so I drew them this picture on the back of my exercise book instead. And it's really, really ruby red. I think pomegranates are now my most favourite fruit in the whole wide world, not just because of the way they taste, but because of how they look. On the outside, they look like extra shiny balls that have been dipped into a bucket of sunset colours, like peach and pink and gold. But the inside is even cooler, because when you pull one open, it's like finding a million sparkling red rubies all squashed together inside a round suitcase and bursting to get out. Now, they're talking a lot about these pomegranates, so I feel like it must come up somewhere else in the story. They're not just going to spend a whole chapter describing how he went to find pomegranates and then all about what they look like. It must come up later in the story. You have to push each one out gently, Mum had said when she had cut mine open and shown me how to pop the seeds out. See? As if you're plucking out jewels from the roof of a cave. She showed me how to peel off the skin, laying between the seeds too, but I didn't like that part so much because the peelings looked like bits of old snake skin that I'd seen in the zoo once. I meant to give the pomegranates to the new boy at home time, but I was so excited that I couldn't wait until then. So as soon as the bell for the first break began to ring, I hid the pomegranate under my school jumper and hurried out into the playground with it. We're not allowed to take food in the playground because we're only supposed to eat snacks in the dinner hall. But I wasn't going to eat it or make anyone else eat it, so I didn't think it counted. The new boy followed us out because he knew we were his friends. He had stopped disappearing every break time and only went to have his seclusion during lunchtimes. I wonder what this seclusion is. Even Miss Hempsey had stopped coming out during first breaks and went to the staff room, which I think meant she knew we were new boys' best friends. Here, I said, as soon as we got out in the corner of the playground and pulled out the pomegranate from under my jumper. I held it to him and said, "It's for you." Josie and Michael looked at each other and Tom looked at me, and as we all waited for the new boy to say something, but he just stared and stared. First at us and then at the pomegranate, and didn't say or do anything. "Knew you shouldn't have put that sticker on it," whispered Tom, shaking his head. Then slowly the new boy reached out and took the pomegranate in his hands. "Home," he said quietly, his lion eyes getting very big. "I have home." Oh my gosh, that must have made them go like this. Oh. "Yes," I said, "you're home in Syria. I've seen it on a map. You know, map?" The boy fell quiet. And then for the first time since we had met him, he smiled. Not a small smile or a side smile or even half a smile, but a real proper smile that went from one cheek to another and which made his eyes smile too. He opened his mouth to say something when suddenly Brendan the bully pushed past us. Every good story has a problem. "Give me that," he said, and he snatched the pomegranate from Ahmed's hands. "Give it back," I shouted, feeling scared and angry all at once. "Make me," sneered Brendan the bully as he turned around to face me. I didn't know why, but sometimes when someone you don't like looks at you right in the eyes, they suddenly seem to grow taller and you suddenly feel shorter, and even when really you're both the same size. Usually it's only for a few seconds, but then you grow back to your normal height again. Sometimes it goes for so long that you wonder if you'll ever get back to the height you used to be. This was one of those times when Brendan the bully turned to look at me. He stared into my eyes so hard for so long that he seemed to grow by at least 2 more inches. But I was feeling so hot and angry that I could feel my ears going red and I didn't care. I took a step forward and tried to grab the pomegranate back. "Go on, try again," laughed Brendan the bully as he whipped it away and held it high above his head. I could feel my face getting redder and redder and my legs getting shorter and shorter as I tried to jump and snatch it back from him. Then suddenly he threw the pomegranate to Chris, who was standing behind me. Chris caught it and tossed it up and down in one hand, waiting for one of us to try and do something. Josie and Tom and Michael all lunged forward, but Chris was too quick and threw the pomegranate to Liam, who quickly threw it back to Brendan the bully. This might have carried on all break time because Brendan the bully likes playing this game and no one has ever beaten him at it. But then what happened next was so unexpected, so shocking, so fantastic that even Brendan the bully didn't know what to do. Because suddenly, with a huge roar, Ahmed ran straight at Brendan the bully like an angry lion, crashed into him with his head. Brendan the bully fell backwards on the floor, his legs swinging up in the air. We all gasped out loud, but Ahmed did not stop there. He jumped on top with his face red and patchy and punched Brendan the bully as many times as he could, shouting something that none of us could understand. Someone behind us yelled, "Fight!" and everyone in the playground ran over to watch. But this was the most shocking thing of all. It wasn't really a fight. You need 2 people at least to be in a fight. And Brendan the bully wasn't fighting back. Not at all, not even for a second. Instead, he was holding his arms over his face as Ahmed continued punching and roaring and shouting at him with all his might. He's probably traumatized from his experience in Syria. And so when people are traumatized, they actually they lose control. They're triggered by something, and he's been triggered. And also he needs that pomegranate. You know, that's a taste of home. And you would be upset too if someone stole something that was that precious. "Break it up now," shouted a voice as the crowd parted and Mr. Irons and Mrs. Sanders came running through. But Ahmed wouldn't stop. He was like a machine that didn't have an off button, and he continued to punch and punch and punch as hard and as fast as he could. "Right, young man," cried Mr. Irons, and grabbed him by the back of his jumper. Mr. Irons lifted Ahmed up off Brendan the bully, while Mrs. Sanders pulled Brendan the bully back on his feet. Everyone fell quiet. I didn't know if it was because they were all wondering what was going to happen next, or because none of us could believe that Brendan the bully had actually been hurt. His face was bright red and his eyes looked watery, and there were tiny stones from the playground floor stuck to the sides of his cheeks. With a horrible glint in his eye, Mr. Irons stared down at Ahmed and shouted, "What do you think you're doing, boy, eh?" So we've already established that Mr. Irons is actually not thinking from other people's points of view. I think he's probably quite racist. He also doesn't like refugees, and he's ignorant, and so he's supporting Brendan the bully. Ahmed stared angrily at the floor and didn't say anything. "Who started this?" shouted Mrs. Sanders, who was so angry that she had forgotten to look over her glasses and was looking at everyone straight through them instead. I immediately pointed to Brendan the bully, and so did Tom, Josie, and Michael. "Right, all of you with me now," ordered Mrs. Sanders, dragging Brendan the bully by the arm across the playground and into school. Mr. Irons flicked his hand and pointed to the doors, his nose whistling louder than it had ever whistled before. I followed Tom, Josie, and Michael as we all hung our heads and made our way through the crowds. Everyone stared at us and then stared at Ahmed. His face was even redder than mine, and his lion eyes were so big and wet they looked like they were drowning. He wiped away an angry tear and looked back over his shoulder. I looked back too and saw lots of bright pink spots all over the ground. The pomegranate had smashed open and all its ruby red seeds had been crushed beneath everyone's feet. After we told Mrs. Sanders all about what had happened, she gave me 50 lines. I had to write 50 lines of the same thing to do for taking the pomegranate out in the playground. Well, that's not fair. And she said that Ahmed and Brendan the bully had to write lines every night for the rest of the week with Mr. Irons. So that means they have to stay after school, and instead of doing activities, they have to write the same sentence again and again and again. Very old-fashioned way of solving a problem. It's definitely not trying to get to the bottom of the problem and figure out who needs help and who needs help growing up through life and having a better attitude. We tried to tell her and Mrs. Khan that the fight wasn't Amit's fault and that sometimes hitting someone when they're being horrible and taking something from yours away from you can make you feel 100 times better than you just telling the teacher ever would. Even 1,000,000 times better. But they just shook their heads and said that Amit should never have hit Brendan the bully. We didn't say anything after that because sometimes you can tell when grown-ups won't listen to you anymore. Usually they say, "That's the end of it," or "I've said my piece," or "That's that." But teachers always say, "That's all, you can leave now." As we left, I told Amit that I was sorry for getting him into trouble and that I would try and find another pomegranate for him. All he did was give me a nod and a thumbs up. I think it was his way of telling me not to worry and that being able to roar like a lion on top of a bully was worth doing the lines for. Even if it was hundreds of them in a language he didn't know how to speak yet. As we all went home that afternoon, we talked about the big fight and how Amit was going to be famous because he was the first boy to have ever beaten Brendan the bully. "You wait and see," said Tom. "Everyone's going to want to be friends now, even the cool kids." I guessed Tom was right, but it made me feel quite sad. If Amit made friends with cool kids, that meant he wouldn't talk to us or play football with us anymore. There's a law that says cool kids can only ever hang out with cool kids. There's not a law. And when you get to an adult, you look back and think, well, some of those kids who seem to be cool at school, they are actually really not cool adults. So he wouldn't talk to us or play football with us anymore. There's a law that says cool kids can only ever hang out with other cool kids and they mustn't talk to us, except for when they're put in a group with us by a teacher. I don't know who wrote that law, but Michael knows all about it. I guess his mum must have told him. But it turned out Michael was wrong about the law because Amit never stopped being our friend, not even after he became the most popular boy in the school for beating up Brendan the bully. You wouldn't generally be popular for hurting somebody, but Brendan the bully has obviously been real trouble. Like real bully, like nasty, horrible, dangerous guy. That's a real bully. And not even when all the newspapers in the world had made him the most famous refugee boy on the planet. I think that must be a hook for the next chapter. And not even when all the newspapers in the world made him the most famous refugee boy on the planet. Interesting.